That's fine.
Okay, perfect.
As I said, I don't have a classroom, so my original lesson was supposed to be like part of a mini research unit, but I had to basically beg teachers to let me kind of get some time in it. Because as you guys know, like after there was AR testing for those in the younger grades and just getting closer to the end of the year, I ended up just working with a small group of kids out of their LA class, so they were kind of ahead of the game, so the teacher let me work with them. And basically, as you mentioned, Becca, mine was a little disconnected because they were doing literature circles. But what I did basically was I kind of had them define what digital citizenship was, and then this was seventh graders, by the way, so a group of like 5 seventh graders, and then like a think, pair, share ish, and then we talked a little bit about that. I was kind of surprised because they kind of struggled at first, like what that was, and then we talked about citizenship, and then they got it. And then we talked about how digital citizenship can relate to their health, and they immediately went kind of towards spending too much time online and like video game addiction. So we talked a little bit about that. So there's other ways that can affect your health, and then basically, although that was kind of our main focus, I had them read, a pair read one article, and then each of the others just read their own article. One hitting mainly on kind of like video game, like addiction type, like the mental aspect of it. Actually, 2 of them were focused more on the mental aspect, like cyberbullying and that stuff. And then the other one was focusing more on the physical aspects. And then I just had them each, they were going to make an infographic, but we ran out of time. So they each pulled out like 3 facts that they got from the article, and I had them write in an exit slip, and then how they feel that they can like improve their digital like health, like things that they can be better at. So overall, I think like because they don't know me that well, I think they did a good job. They said they needed a little prompting in the beginning. I was kind of surprised. I think that's what surprised me the most is that they just kind of looked at me like, when I asked what citizenship was. So I talked to my librarian about it. Like, I think we need to beef that up a little bit. But overall, I think it went pretty good. And we really talked about the connection between the etiquette, like how you behave online can affect other people mentally, like they're emotionally and things like that. So I think they got the connection.
Cool. Yeah, I kind of had a similar situation with my students where they like didn't really take it super seriously. It was almost like I know how to do this already, or I know how to engage online. But since I had to, so the textbook we use for 101 is this Grassroots Writing Research Journal, and so there were 2 articles in there. One that talked about like 3 different social media platforms and like how people curate their like posts, and then one was about social media grieving groups and tribute posts and stuff. So I had them read those, and then we kind of talked about like in terms of the one about social media grieving. She goes through the rules of etiquette about posting tribute posts. So that's how we started talking about digital etiquette. And I was like, okay, well, do we have any other rules that we could add to this? And I showed them some videos so that they had some background in it. And then we kind of just had a discussion about like, what does digital etiquette look like? Who are you considering when you're thinking about posting something online? So in that case, you don't want to post something before the family does, was one of the rules we were talking about, and things like that. But then for their activity that night, I had them go out and find a comment or like a comment thread that was, aggressive or hostile in some way, and rewrite them in a way that they think would be more productive. And for the most part, they did pretty well. I feel like some of the students were not aware about how tone would come across necessarily. So some of the words they used, I was like, you probably wouldn't want to use this if you're trying to prevent hostility. But overall, they didn't do too badly. I think the thing is for them is that like if they know the people, they're gonna be polite. But if they don't, they're kind of gonna have that like filter of like, I shouldn't say this, maybe on, or at least that's what I was getting from their work. And then the second day, because I did a 2-part lesson, we talked about health and wellness, and we still connected it to the reading about social media posts. And how we did that was I talked about, like, is having this community of people who are also grieving with you good in terms of digital health and wellness, good for your mental health, good for, you going through this grieving process, or is it something that maybe is a little bit too dark for you? Like, and we had a discussion about that. So most students said that, they find it useful, and some of them had even had experiences with these sorts of groups. But they also were like, but after a certain point, you have to start limiting the amount of time you spend on these sorts of pages because it isn't good for your mental health. And we did get into some stuff about, inspiration on Instagram and how that can make people feel really badly about themselves. But the hardest thing for them to really zoom in on was the physical wellness part. So like ergonomics and stuff like that. So I tried to push them, and I was like asking, okay, well, do your eyes ever get really tired, or do you get a headache from staring at the computer for too long when you're doing classwork? And they were just kind of like, not really, and things like that. But kind of like what Beth said, the biggest thing they noticed was the amount of time spent online is their biggest issue in terms of digital health and wellness. So I thought it went pretty well. I think the big pushback here is that, they're all 18 or over, and they've been using technology their whole life, so they are just kind of like, I already know this stuff. And I'm like,
yeah.
So.
Well, and I think building off of that, Becca, is kind of interesting how my lesson plan rolled out. So mine was very specific to creating a speech for policymakers at a university. So they are given the Global Wellness Report, that 32-page report, and they had to synthesize it. They had to make sense of it and do something with it. So they had to create a 10 to 15-minute presentation in groups of 4 to 5 to Board of Trustees or some kind of theoretical group that makes decisions on campus of how to incorporate these things in our courses, how to create initiatives on the campus. So it really took them away. So one, it addresses the issue of like who their target audience was. So you kind of address that of like who are they talking to. So they, these aren't their friends. These aren't people that they talk to on a daily basis. These aren't even their peers. These are decision makers. And the second thing was it took them away from the idea of like, okay, am I doing it? It's the people that make policies and decisions. Are they doing it, and are they giving me the resources that we need? So if they think that they're doing these things correctly, then they could create policy initiatives. So one thing that I wanted to encourage them to do were create 2 or 3 like tangible things that they could take to the board and say, we would like X amount of hours for this, or we would like to have a required course in the general education curriculum that talk about these different things. So I gave them very little guidance as to what to create, and my 4 different groups came up with very clear policies and a very articulate message of saying, like you said, we know this is an issue. However, is it being properly addressed in the college curriculum, in the college like access resources that are free, things like that. So it was interesting that the target message and kind of disconnecting from like, this isn't my decision, that's somebody else's decision, I'm going to try to persuade them, I think to help in creating this wellness kind of reflection from them stepping away from themselves, which was helpful.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. And I think that's like a really different audience than they typically interact with. So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. That sounds cool.
I was going to say, kind of going off, I think some of the things that you guys were saying, especially with students being easier for them to actually be polite when it's people that they know, specifically where, especially like if you're just in an open forum, it's, you kind of have this facade that you can just say whatever because it doesn't really matter. I definitely saw that with the lesson that I did. I kind of incorporated the digital etiquette into a lesson I already teach with 8th grade, but I just kind of expanded it. I'm trying to also like incorporate Google Classroom more into my lessons, and so they had to do a project redesign where they had to create an object. They'd use their drawing skills to redesign something, think like a designer. But then in terms of critique and feedback, I had them use Google Classroom as their forum. And so to do that, and they knew who obviously was in the classroom and had to give peer feedback, it's something that initially they're kind of hesitant about because, like, yes, you have to, we talk about how you can be critical and you have to be, constructive feedback and criticism. But because they knew who each other was, leaving comments, and they knew that their work was going to get critiqued as well.
Yeah.
I felt like they were probably even more polite and respectful online than they would have been just in face-to-face interactions, even if they do know them.
Yeah.
So I think in that regard, it was something that was helpful for them to be able to see, and even because these are kids that peers that they've had since, some of them kindergarten, they'll have them for 4 more years in high school, being in a smaller district. And so I feel like it was something that definitely helped kind of go beyond just their own dynamics of just like this lesson, but then also just kind of, making real world connections or building peer relationships, those kinds of things in the classroom, was a little bit evident. So it's kind of nice to take that and then just kind of work that in to kind of enhance something that we currently do.
Yeah.
So it's nice to kind of have a chance to see them do that. And but yeah, it's really interesting when they're initially just very hesitant to offer their peers any kind of feedback that's, I guess I'm going to point out something maybe that needs to get improved, but just learning how to do that in a way where it's not combative, or the language that you're using, it's not enlisting someone to come back and be defensive. And so that's definitely a strategy that they do not get a chance to practice very often. So it was kind of nice to see them interact in that way. So I could totally relate to that.
So for everybody, was there a particular thing that stood out for you when you ran the lesson? So for my example, was one thing that all my groups came up with was this idea of cherishing and cultivating a non-digital humanity. So they really emphasize, like, we talk about how we know technology and,
Right.
we're digital natives. They even know, they talk about those things. But they said, we're stressing technology so much. Are we creating a dialogue of, that we need to still continue to cherish these things in terms of face-to-face communication? So things that
Sure.
in the offhanded way we say and we value, but then sometimes we discredit younger generations in an offhanded way when we create these policies, like, oh, they know how to do these things. So they all talked about how to cherish these things. So it was really interesting to me to see those. So were there particular things that you were like, oh wow, that was insightful, or something that kind of caught you off guard?
I think something that I thought was pretty cool was talking about not just the different audiences that you're coming into contact with in different spaces, but also how you're changing the persona you're putting forward in different digital spaces, and how that then affects like the etiquette that you're going to be taking on. So a lot of students were talking about how their Facebook is kind of like their professional face, and they try to avoid putting any pictures on there that are even slightly risky, or something that would, a lot of them cleaned them out when they were going through college admissions. I had a couple that were like, I just changed my name so they couldn't find me. And I'm like, I don't think that necessarily means anything, but okay. And then I thought we had a really interesting discussion about Finsta, which is like fake Instagram. And like them talking about how, they have Instagrams where they're trying to present this like, oh, I have it together. I'm living my best life sort of thing. And we did talk about how that can be really damaging to people. But on the other hand, they were like, but my Finsta, only my friends know that one, and it's totally private, so I can be whatever I want on there. And, we talked about that a little bit. So I thought it was interesting how they've kind of learned to compartmentalize different parts of their identities in different platforms according to what they believe to be appropriate for that platform or another platform. I think that was one of my most interesting takeaways.
Well, it's interesting you said that, because that was something that came up when my students talked about that people present, I really didn't even put it like this, but, like you said, like your best life, but this is, it doesn't necessarily mean what you're seeing is reality. And I just thought it was cool being 7th graders that they kind of were catching on to that. And they're like, we know that this isn't all, that people are doing that. Take it more as a grain of salt. I just thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it was cool. I know for me, I wasn't necessarily expecting to maybe see some of the positive effects, kind of just the way that they interact with one another. After this, I just got, yes, they're interacting in the lesson and they're using the tools, they're understanding digital etiquette, but just to see how that their digital world then did really affect their real world as well, with how they were interacting with, because they knew the kids they were interacting with, especially more so than just, they're going to see that person face to face. They kind of had a certain sense of like ownership and responsibility of what they said online. So, and then in that regard, it was kind of interesting. That makes sense, but like I wasn't necessarily, I guess, expecting that or to see that as evidence. That was pretty cool.
Cool. I have a question though too. So, did you guys have to make any like either on the spot changes to your lesson plan as you were teaching it, or even after you taught it, where you're like, okay, if I were to do this again, I would do this differently? Just wondering.
I would say that I would adjust. I didn't adjust when I did it, so I'd say moving forward when I do this again, in terms of going through the report and how I kind of told them about the key elements in it. I would make it a bit more, I don't know what the word I'm looking for. I don't really give them much. I give them less direction, which I know seems counterintuitive. But I think I steered them in a particular way. I'm like, this is what you should be looking for, and then they're like, okay, this is what he wants to hear. So maybe just giving them the report and say, take what you want out of it. They did that, and I was surprised with a lot of things that they did. But I think if I just gave it to them and say, you synthesize everything that you can out of it, I think that might help. So moving forward, I'm going to just be a bit more ambiguous. So
I would agree with that. I mean, for mine, I kind of opened it up with, what digital etiquette was and gave them explanation before they engaged in the activities that involved that online. And so I could definitely see maybe starting that instead with just, what do you think this is? How might this, what examples or experiences have you had, good and bad, with this, and just kind of opening it up from that. And then maybe going into more instruction if they miss something. Because I think a lot of times they hit a lot of the key points that you don't realize. Maybe not necessarily the same order, or sometimes they'll come up with something that you didn't even necessarily think of. But I think it might come across as more authentic to them, like you're saying, instead of just like, oh, well, this is what the teacher wants, or the instructor wants this, so I'll just spit that back. I think that could definitely be an improvement.
I think I would definitely give, I kind of picked the articles for them. My original plan was maybe to have a text set or something where they kind of were going and looking a little bit more themselves and here to read information from here, to have a little bit more ownership on their part than this is what I want you to look at.
Yeah, I could totally see almost a little bit of a research component, a little mini research. And our school uses EBSCO database for middle schoolers, and so that could totally be something where if they were going to use that, especially to find other examples or evidence, that could probably be helpful too.
Yeah, I think for me, I did this over 2 days, but my classes are just 50 minutes. And I felt it was a little bit rushed. So if I were to be able to do this over 2 75-minute classes, I think it would work out better. But if I do continue with a 3-day a week, and I continue with 50 minutes, I think maybe even taking some time in that third day to just kind of finish out everything and bring it all together would be helpful. Because then it'll just feel a little bit more cohesive, I think, for them and for me, for that matter. So that's something that I would want to do different. And I mean, the only other question I had is whether you guys would keep this and do it again or not. And I think Dakota kind of already answered that in his reply originally, but I don't know if Nicole or Beth has anything to add on that.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely add that again. I know it's a lesson that my students do pretty much every semester, and so it's something that's kind of nice to incorporate that side and kind of have that lesson evolve and engage more students into that or reach that out, or especially since a lot of times with middle school there's that whole social emotional learning piece. That's something that's kind of becoming more prevalent and mandated that schools teach. So I could totally see instead of just doing some separate lesson on a social emotional thing, they have a context. It's nice when you can actually have time to think about how that integrates already into the different projects and classes that you're teaching. And so I think to me this lends to kind of a more of an authentic way to have students kind of exercise with that. So I would plan to do this again.
I would as well. I'm working towards my LIS degree, so this is definitely the things librarians work on: digital citizenship, information literacy. So 100%.
And I think I would also want to do this again. I think if I could find a way to more fully connect this topic with what we have to do in class, I think it would be even better. So it'll require some more thinking and kind of fiddling around, I think. But I'm also starting to teach something different in the fall, which maybe I can, see how this will work with that. I don't know.
What are you teaching?
Literature course.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. It'll be fun. But yeah, that's all the questions I have. Do you guys have any?
Well, I had kind of a final thought, not really a question. If Beth and Nicole, you had some questions too, feel free. But to me, it was interesting. I really wanted to hear what Beth Nicole had to say in terms of your group because of the age differences between mine and Becca's. Like, I think it would be fascinating moving forward where we have some of these conversations where my students could see what the students in your classrooms are saying, like what digital wellness means to them versus what it means in college. Because one, the environment's different, your schedule's different, everything is, right? But I would bet that a lot of the answers are very similar, and it would kind of reinforce these ideas of what's happening where we're inundated with these things on a daily basis, but it doesn't really change. Have we been teaching ourselves and teaching others the way to deal with these things? Yes or no? I think that'd be interesting and maybe shed some light. They're like, you know what? Even 8 years ago, I was asking these same questions and I never got the answers, or I thought I got the answers like we talked about. So it'd just be interesting to see. There could be some crossover there.
Yeah. I think also, like, along those lines, thinking about that time management was both something that I've mentioned and something that Nicole mentioned, and how, like, you know, they're in different situations, right? In college, they have to kind of do that themselves versus, like, in middle school, right? That's where you teach, Nicole?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So in middle school, like, you would think that they would have a little bit more regulation from, like, the parents maybe or something like that at home. But I don't know. It seems like it's a problem across both of those kind of age groups. So
yeah, I would say, I mean, I'm shocked. I mean, because I'm a parent as well, and so being a teacher and a parent now, I'm shocked at the amount of kids that have just devices that are just totally unmonitored.
Yeah.
And then the time where, I mean, it's almost in that regard, it's almost like you are in college because they don't even know what you're on, or there's such a lack of just maybe the age gap there where the parent had no idea that this is even a forum that you can use to, you know, bully somebody. And so I think that's really, I think especially in middle school, just any other elements or ways that students can really understand kindness, how that works, and how, you know, it's not okay to just, you know, flippantly make remarks to people and not think about how that might make them feel. And so that's definitely something that I think, you know, in a way, I think some of them, they try to act older than they are. And so it's just being able to see that, you know, these things that you say or that you leave, they do have lasting effects, especially if they're people that you still have to interact with on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it would be good
could either
for them.
be positively or negative. Yeah.
I think it would be good for them to see too, like speaking with someone that's older and more
Mm-hmm.
experienced, that, you know, like these things that they're going through now, or the dramas or the cyberbullying, like maybe the effects if they, you know, the students
Sure.
stories of what they went through, or seeing that, you know, what you're putting online matters as you're getting older and you're going to college or you're looking for a job later, and to see that it doesn't stop, like your digital footprint continues.
Right.
kind of like that one video we saw about the digital footprint being like a tattoo or whatever.
Oh
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of like that.
Yeah, I know for middle school, I could totally see this as some sort of an assembly that they kind of would put for kids, and just showing, you know, I know we just had like the Google assembly where the people were talking about being internet awesome, and they gave all the kids the shirts, and some of them thought it was completely like hokey that, you know, they had these shirts on like that, and it was a little bit over the top. But I think if they could see kind of the course of what happens here, this may, or almost like a real life story. This is someone that, you know, they did lose their job because their Instagram feed was ridiculous, or they weren't hired because of this, or just kind of seeing how, you know, it's not, you know, I mean, I know a lot of middle school, the big thing is Snapchat, and how they'll think that, you know, oh, it's fine. It's like, you can screenshot it. So well, it's not really safe, but they just don't get it.
Yeah, like I mean, like a lot of this stuff, like I, you know, grew up with, like I, especially like stuff like Snapchat, like it's recent, right? So like stuff like that, I don't even know how I would handle with a younger age group, because, you know, especially like Instagram and stuff like that, they are way more into it than I was ever. So I have no idea how you guys do it, but I am always impressed. So yeah, it's intense. That's a lot of stuff.
So we're getting to a timer that just popped up in terms of I've got to upgrade here shortly. So
Okay, cool.
is any final questions that we needed to tackle before we leave each other?
I think the only thing I was wondering is, are we putting this in the collaboration space?
Yeah, so I'll throw it in I'll send everybody an email as well. So I'll put it under our Digital Citizen Project.
Okay.
Right under that meeting, there'll be a link to this video as well.
Okay.
So
And are we attaching our reflections on there as well?
yeah, I'd say just go ahead and throw the document on there.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I
I'll.
would say, and otherwise, I know I put mine just in like my personal page. If I
Okay.
throw it in there, I probably would throw a copy of the video recording in there too, so it's
Okay.
it's there at least 4 times.
Okay. Once I get it
And I can
uploaded,
email-
I'll let you know.
I can email Dr. Purcell and say that like we've put it on there so that he can know to like look back on our digital citizenship project. I'll do that right after we get off here.
Okay.
Cool.
Cool. Okay. Well, I'll put that up there, and it was good working with all of you. I think we're good to
You
go.
too. Have
Great.
a
Have a
good
good night.
semester/years.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Take care.
Bye.